Thanks very much, Manon. Thank you for having me join you guys today. And it was really nice to see quite so many people last night during the networking. I think it was really well managed. And it was really lovely to get to do something a bit more social on these things, seeing as we can't in real life. But thanks very much, everyone, for joining us for today's session, which is, as Manon said, the Wave and Floating Offshore Wind Project Showcase. So we've got an expert lineup of panel members here today who are going to talk you through their projects so that we can discuss how we can capitalise on the early mover advantage that we've got here in Wales and the Southwest as well, with floating offshore wind developers looking at the Southwest, and there are more and more opportunities being realised to co-locate technology with wave energy in the Pembrokeshire demonstration zone. So as Manon said, do feel free to pop your questions in the chat. We'll be saving those all for the end after all of our speakers have spoken. So my first speaker for today is Sam from Bombora. So I would like to invite you to take the stage, Sam. I think you might be on mute still, Sam. Are you?
I'll have to start again. Share screen.
It's always the way it works perfectly in the practice and then glitches.
Okay, sorry. I've been a bit of an echo on this end, but I hope it's okay for you. Okay, so I guess just to summarise where Bombora is at. So we arrived here at the end of 2017 with a micro team. I think it was about 4 of us at the time. We've now grown our team to 27 people, and I guess it's a great team. We have a great supply chain engaged, and I guess we have a growing list of project partners, as I'll talk a bit about today. So I guess what are we up to? So we've got a Pembrokeshire project, and this is a 1.5 megawatt project here in Wales, and we're on the countdown to deployment of that right now. We've got the Inspire projects. So we announced these several months back, and this is our cooperation with Technip FMC, and it's primarily focused on floating solutions, and in fact, floating integrated solutions. And I guess the great thing is we've got a strong partner, but we've also been able to bring in very strong consortium partners on the back of that as well. So building a very strong project going forward with the Technip Corporation. At the same time, we've got an operation, let's say an initiative into Asia. That's been led by Mitsui OSK Lines, and that's primarily looking at opportunities in the Asian region, both for projects and for supply. So I guess behind all that, we're building up our project pipeline, and the initial focus will be on diesel replacement, which is high costs of energy replacement, and decarbonisation. So I guess just back to our Pembrokeshire project. So 1.5 megawatts here in Wales. And I guess we're, as I mentioned, we're on the countdown to deployment. So I guess just some of the pretty pictures around what we're doing. On the left-hand side here, you'll see the PTO coming together. So this is a 1.2 metre turbine, which is mounted in a ducting system. So one-way airflow flowing through the turbine, spinning about 1,000 RPM. And that's currently going through the final assembly phase. In this case, the turbine is mounted directly onto the generator and delivers power directly. On the mid-top side, you'll see the main structure, some of the modules. So as you imagine, our concept is very simple in terms of the fact that we're just using a membrane to pump large volumes of air. But of course, behind all that, there's control systems and the like. And you'll see on the top right here some of the control sort of and modules that are supporting the whole system coming together. And the umbilical, which takes the power to shore to our onshore control station on the bottom right. So we've been busy building the cell modules as well. So this is right next door to us in Pembroke Dock. So we've built 3 of them so far, and that's one to go. And here you can see the valve systems sit behind the membrane. So the membrane fits across this large aperture in the middle of my screen, and then the air is, I guess, rectified through this valve system behind the cell. And back to the all-critical membrane. So we've been manufacturing these in Taiwan. The first few have arrived here in Pembroke Dock, and looking forward to assembling them onto the cell modules. So I guess, as I said, we're on the countdown to finish this project. And this is very important because this opens up the market. So we have the cell module and the PTO module that can then be applied into a range of different applications. So bottom left, we have the fixed bed applications where the end wave is fixed to the seabed. We've been developing floating solutions, and we talked a bit about those this morning in our session with Apollo. We can use them in a co-located sort of arrangement with wind, or we can use them in a fully integrated version like this. And, you know, I guess there are some advantages, of course, for co-location in the fact that you can share infrastructure, share electrical infrastructure, and you get better power generation from your seabed lease. But I guess it's interesting that, you know, our studies really show that when we come to the right-hand side here, where we integrate wind with wave, that's where we build benefits, where we're able to share the floating foundation system, share the costs. We get more consistent power output and the like. So this is a very appealing endpoint to go to. The challenge, of course, as you can imagine, is that we now have multiple systems working together, and we need to make sure that we can meet the requirements of the wind turbine as well as our requirements for our operation as well. And they are sometimes together and sometimes conflicting. So I mentioned a bit about our cooperation with Technip. This is a very exciting stage for us because we're dealing with a very competent EPCI partner who's bringing a lot of skills into our sort of operation. So there are two major, I guess, phases to this project. One is where we are doing a phase one, which is a fairly modest-sized demonstration up in the North Sea, with a view to then moving to larger platforms where we combine the true benefits of a very large wind turbine with a large capacity wave generation. So as I mentioned, we're bringing together some very exciting business partners into that consortium and looking forward to talking more about it in the future. I guess the critical thing is here that we've gone to the fully integrated solution. We've been working with Technip for the last 6 months, and we've gone and analysed the co-location, analysed fixed bed, all those different options we've been analysing. And the solution, the best solution in terms of cost of energy, is the integrated solution. So it does bring with it some risks, as I mentioned before, about when you're combining wind with wave, but the prize is very worthwhile because we're able to actually reduce the cost of offshore wind. And so we're not so focused then about the cost of our wave energy solution. We're actually focused on bringing down the cost of floating offshore wind. And just to quantify that, the studies we've been doing show that we're getting roughly, we can get up to a 20% lower cost of energy than the floating offshore wind solution by itself. So it's a very exciting prize to be going after. Okay, so that's our, I guess, the main activities. I guess to back all this up, of course, we need to think about what we're going to do with our operations. So we're now talking about expansion of our operations here in Pembroke Dock. So we're looking at using this as the major assembly and export centre. We're looking at having satellite engineering offices to support projects as required. So a very exciting time for us. As we mentioned in our this morning's session, we are growing. So if you're looking for a new career opportunity, come and join us. We've got an exciting time ahead of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. That's really interesting. I'm looking forward to sort of finding out a bit more about the integrated solution during the questions and answers. I've no doubt there'll be plenty of interest in that. So I'd like to move on to our next speaker. So Graham Foster from Marine Power Systems, you are up next. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. I'm just going to get my screen shared. Okay, so that should be maximized now, Kerry.
Perfect, thank you.
Great, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to Marine Energy Wales for inviting me to speak today. And it's my pleasure to bring you all up to speed with the progress that we're making here at Marine Power Systems. So firstly, just for those of you that don't know us, putting it simply, our vision at Marine Power Systems is unlocking the power of the oceans. And we've developed a technology system for extracting the maximum ocean energy from any given area of seabed. And to do this, we've developed 3 pieces of technology: WaveSub, which is a wave energy only device; WindSub, which is a floating foundation for offshore wind; and DualSub, which is combining the two. And to do this, we've developed 2 proprietary technologies in-house: a platform system and a wave energy converter. So I'll just move on to the platform system first. So we've worked very hard on the platform system because it literally does underpin everything you do in the offshore environment. So it's been absolutely vital for us to make sure we approach this in the best possible way. And we're very happy with what we've achieved with our platform system. So we've developed a system that addresses all the key requirements that are needed to be successful in this offshore environment. So to start with, it's manufacturable. It's easy to manufacture in submodules that can be brought together for quayside assembly. It's transportable with standard vessels available in most ports. It's deployable. We have a unique self-deploying system that allows the machine to be connected to the moorings, and then you stand back and the machine deploys itself. It's stable. I'll tell you a little bit more about that on the next slide. The platform in itself is maintainable, but it also allows the straightforward maintenance of the equipment attached to it, whether that's a wave energy converter or a wind turbine. And of course, it's survivable. And that obviously that last point is key, but we do this by making sure that all of the major structure is either completely above the waves or completely below the waves, and that the structure that's exposed to the waves is a thin lattice structure that doesn't actually put a resistance in front of the waves in the first place. So what I want to talk about a bit today as well is just the performance of the systems that we're developing. So for us at MPS, this is vital. We want to make sure that we come to market with the best performing technology. And as I mentioned earlier, we've put a lot of work into making sure that is the case. So with our platform system, whilst we were confident internally that it was the right approach, we've recently commissioned a detailed third-party study to verify how it's doing against the competitor options. And we're very happy with the results. So if we just look at this graph on the right, this is a comparison of how our platform compares to generic semi-subs, generic barge solutions, generic spar and keel solutions. And as you can see, we have not only the lowest overall structure mass, but the lowest system mass, and by quite some margin as well. And we expect this to be reflected in the cost. And as we all know, when we're looking at floating solutions offshore, the cost of the main structure is a large part of the overall cost of energy. So our platform also has the lowest offset. So in use and in storms, the station keeping of the platform is better than these other systems. It has the lowest nacelle accelerations and the smallest mooring footprint. All of these things are important if we're going to realize the vision of large farms of offshore marine energy devices. Now, with a tension system such as ours, the anchoring is critical, and we've again put a lot of work into this, and we've made sure through another detailed third-party study that for every soil type that we're likely to encounter, from soft sediment right through to rock, there's an anchoring solution that works for our system, and we've completed that, and again, very happy with the results of that. So I'm now going to move on to the wave energy to start with the sort of generic look at the system. I'm just going to play a video there. Okay, so there's a video here and it's not working, but the most important thing about our wave energy system is the orbital pathway of the absorber. And this is important because wave energy is actually an orbital subsurface flow of energy. And to get the most out of it, the absorber needs to be following that energy path. Now, our system is tunable to all commonly occurring sea states, and this gives high annual yields. And the automatic storm configuration will retract the floats down against the deck of the device in storms and keep the level of those absorbers below any storm waves. I'm just talking a little bit more about the performance because, again, advantages on their own are great, but this has to come together with performance. And our system is very high performing. We're confident that it's the best or amongst the best performing of any wave energy system in development. The PTO and control systems work together to have complete control of the orbit that the absorber takes. And this allows us to have increased capture in small waves, decreased capture in large waves, and then shut down in storms. And it also allows us to control multiple floats together, which is important because that's a way to capture even more energy for a given area of seabed. So the result of this, as you can see from the graph here, is a consistent power matrix. So right across a very wide range of sea conditions, from small waves to large waves to short period to long period, our device delivers a high yield and a high power quality. So just coming back to where we are with the progress of our projects. So in 2019, we completed the testing of our medium scale prototype in Falmouth, which was a project supported by the European Regional Development Fund via WEFO. And here we demonstrated the transportability, maintenance at sea, grid compliant power, all of the key USPs of our technology. And this is great, very successful project. It's really moved us as a business right up the learning curve of how to be successful in the marine environment. So now we're well into our full-scale demonstrator project. This is a 1.5 megawatt single absorber wave energy system. Stage 1 of the design is complete, and that's great. So we now have a full basis of the design ready to progress through the detailed design. The stage 2 is ongoing. Manufacturing will be through 2021 and into 2022. We'll be sea testing in late 2022 and into early 2023. And the target for this project is 50% Welsh supply chain and over 90% UK content. And again, this is another project that's been funded by the European Regional Development Fund via WEFO, and we're very grateful to them for supporting us. Post the completion of that project, we'll be redeploying the system with a wind turbine. And so not only will we be demonstrating our wave-only device, but we'll be demonstrating our combined wind and wave energy device dual sub. So that's it from me. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions in the questions at the end of the session. And like Sam, we at MPS are also recruiting, so there's lots of new jobs. So please take a look at our website. You can see those jobs on the website. And also, if you want to see any more about how our technology works, there's some detailed animations and videos there for you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Graham. And it's encouraging to hear how many jobs are out there, but I'm not sure current employers will be best pleased after today if everybody's handing their notice in to move companies. Thanks very much. That was a really interesting presentation. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions. Up next then, I've got Mike Scott from Blue Gem. So Mike, do you want to take over sharing your slides?
People able to see that?
You can see that. It's not in full screen mode at the moment.
It's not? Okay, 1 second. How's that?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Mike Scott, Project Managing Director for Blue Gem Wind. Thank you very much to Marine Energy Wales for the possibility for presentation here today. And thanks again also for the networking event last night, which was great fun, and of course sponsored by Blue Gem, providing the beer in the glass. Blue Gem Wind Limited started life out just under a year ago with the formation of the joint venture between Simply Blue Energy and Total. and recognisable names within the industry, and Total coming to the fore with lots of aspirations for development of renewable energy, and as an oil and gas major, changing its approach to energy supply. We've created a vision that's really around low carbon offshore energy, especially in the Celtic Sea, where we think there is a significant access to a huge amount of resources and contributes significantly to climate change targets, which I'll come on to. But also, and more importantly, it provides high-skilled jobs, supply chain diversification, and of course that all-important energy security. Floating offshore wind, which is our proposal and offering, contributes in many ways to the various targets. It certainly delivers on the 1 gigawatt by 2030 aspiration that was announced at the back end of last year. Of course, on the net zero aspirations for 2050, and of course the Climate Change Committee aspirations of 100 gigawatts by 2050 of deployed offshore wind. With our projects, Erebus certainly could see that as part of the COVID green recovery and Welsh low carbon economy. A fantastic contribution to that. And there's reports around in the industry, quite numerous, but the OREC report shows that the first gigawatt in the Celtic Sea will kind of contribute to 3,000 jobs and 682 million in supply chain. It's an important aspect for us, and that's something that we're really focused on in our delivery plans and part of our aspirations to deploy. The Celtic Sea itself is a huge area of resource. Again, in many reports, there's probably a capacity of 250 gigawatts in there, with up to 15 to 50 years of realizable capacity practical. And what we've got in our proposal as Blue Gem Wind is a stepping stone approach. And we think that is absolutely critical for the 2030s for deployment of large-scale floating offshore wind, maturity of the technology and maturity of the supply chain to be able to achieve that local supply chain. So our stepping stone projects, a little bit more on those. I think Erebus is pretty obvious. It's well known to people. I would assume our planning process, we're underway with our planning, we're underway with our engineering. We have a target of submission of application for consent at the end of this year. And we go on to actually start a generation in 2026. It's a 100 megawatt test and demonstration project. We have site agreement with the Crown Estate, and we are progressing towards that CFD target, that all important one, to make the projects viable in Q1 of 2023 is the current date. But also wanted to introduce Valorous as a pre-commercial project. We've been developing this for quite some time and actually progressing this at risk. We realize there's still some site security, seabed rights to secure. We're expecting progress on that in the first 2 quarters of this year. But we've secured grid connection agreement for 300 megawatts for this project. As I said, we're already progressing with our environmental and technical assessment for the site. And we're beginning with our submission of scoping in the next week or so to really start the planning process to help us to actually achieve and towards start of generation in 2028. But again, back to that all-important CFD target of 2025 auction round 6. So floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea, which is what we're here to talk about, of marine energy in the area. There are some significant challenges and also opportunities for the region. and we're not shy of sharing those. And part of showing we have a stepping stone approach in our project, it creates a pipeline. And in a business environment with the certainty of pipeline, then supply chains and businesses can actually develop their own business plans and participate and support and see what the opportunities are that are coming along. We see this pipeline as important to achieve the sort of commercial scale capacity in 2030 for floating offshore wind, with bringing in Erebus at 100 megawatts, Valorous at 300, and that takes us into the 2030s. It helps to contribute, as I've already said, to that 1 gigawatt target. The ports and infrastructure bit is vitally important, as I said, with a pipeline. Then we can look at the ports and ask and see and discuss about participation in our journey to deploy these units in the Celtic Sea. It's important that the ports come with us, that we talk to them and we're open so they can see the level of development that's required. It's not going to be easy, but we're here to actually work with local supply chain to ensure that we look to maximize the amount of work and jobs and revenue that comes into the region. There's also a significant amount of local infrastructure and associated infrastructure around the ports, and that's all part of the plan that we continue with those broad discussions of encouragement to participate. The grid connection is a challenge. We've got our grid connection agreements for Erebus and Valorous, as I've mentioned, but that requires in themselves maybe some significant work on the grid infrastructure. And for further capacity in the region, there's going to be further work on infrastructure to help realise the amount of energy that can be brought in through the Celtic Sea into the UK network. Planning and leasing, dare I say, it is always high on people's risk registers. No apologies for that, and we have to make sure and work with the Welsh authorities to support and guide and actually prepare for the planning applications that will come in. Erebus at the end of the year, Valorous probably 2 years after that, to ensure that there's familiarity with the requirements and that the system is capable of actually managing the planning applications for these devices, plus hopefully many more that come through. We're of course waiting for confirmation on the leasing approach to the seabed for Valorous, but again that will expand into potentially around 4 for the Crown Estate in the around 5, sorry, for the Crown Estate in the area in the 2030s. The CFD is a difficult one and something on our radar because it's a competitive activity designed to try and bring lowest cost down, and perhaps with these early deployments, the test and demonstration project, early pre-commercial stuff, that you can't actually use the CFD process in its current form to support those projects and help them to be deployed. Perhaps there's a thought around changing that mechanism or revising it to encourage the local supply chain and UK supply chain to help deliver on these projects. Those questions and challenges were for the session earlier. I'm not asking for people to put in their CVs. I'm asking for supply chain to join us, and please go to our website and submit the details, and we'll quite happily talk and encourage involvement in what I'm sure is exciting projects for the Celtic Sea. And on that note, I'll hand you back to Kerry. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike. And I've just spotted, for anybody interested in your supply chain database, Manon has posted that in the chat. So if anybody was looking for that one, it's there for you now. So next up, we've got Alex Meredith from RWE. So I'll invite you to unmute yourself now.
Diolch yn fawr, Kerry. Pnawn da, pawb, and diolch am y gwahoddiad. Thank you for the invitation. I'll just get my screen up. Is that one showing for you all right?
Yeah, we can see it, and yeah, now that's in full screen. Thank you.
Is that still working?
Yeah, that is still working.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much, Kerry. Thanks to everyone, and I think a real big thanks to Marine Energy Wales. I think this session demonstrates, what advances and progress has been made in the marine sector, and I think floating offshore wind coming in and working collaboratively with the sort of traditional marine sector is a really exciting development for everyone. I think some of the presentations we've already seen have shown what potential that holds. We at RWE come at this as a renewable energy developer and an energy company, and so we're not developing the specific technology that has been discussed here ourselves, although we're collaborating in some areas. But we are looking at sites and opportunities to expand our renewable energy business, and we see Wales as a really exciting opportunity in that context. So this is, I think, a really great opportunity to discuss that with the marine sector and more generally. So let's hope we can move forward from our first slide. Let me see. Let me see if that'll work. There we go. How's that?
Yeah, that's moved forward. Thank you.
You're with me. Good.
Yeah, we've got you.
So just to give a bit of flavour for RWE in Wales, I mean, RWE is a global business, but we have a particular fondness, soft spot history, let's say, for Wales. As you can see, we're the #1 renewable energy generator in Wales. We're actually the biggest electricity producer in Wales. And we have a history. We've invested with our partners over 3 billion in Wales in the last decade. And those investments have been in different technologies. So many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with Pembroke Power Station in Pembroke. But also in the renewable context, the offshore wind developments that we've done in North Wales have been a massive part of our learning experience and development in offshore wind. And we're now the second biggest offshore wind company in the world. But we started that journey in North Wales and the North Oil project in 2004. So, when people talk about Wales being a world leader or an innovator or pioneer, we were there first with offshore wind in the UK with the first commercial scale project. And we are very excited potentially to see how floating follows on that same pathway with Wales right at the front of it and RWE there too. You can see from this map, I live in Cardiff and from South Wales, and I'm sure there's a lot of people on the call from South Wales. We get a lot of stick for not talking enough about Wales more broadly and North Wales. And, for RWE, there's a real spread across Wales. So we have, as I say, Pembrokeshire, we've developed onshore wind sites across South Wales and indeed North Wales. We've got hydro sites and, as I mentioned, the offshore wind sites that we have off the North Wales coast as well. So, this isn't just a story about South Wales. This is something which all of Wales can benefit from. And as I say, we really believe at RWE that should be the case. A couple of notes here about the investments that come into the community. So 8.6 million, it's significant amounts of money going into communities from RWE's projects. And as I say, there's plenty of opportunities, have been in the past and will be in the future for supply chain and skills development too. But just to get to the point on floating wind, we have a view, and I think it's shared by a lot of people in this meeting. But the floating wind will be a massive growth industry in the next 10, 15, 20 years, if not beyond. The chart here is one that's known in the industry, but it's important because it shows how quickly we may move to a really significant scale deployment of floating wind, and we expect that to happen. And the important thing on this chart is the dark blue, the EU section for the purposes of this conversation. And we want to make sure that Wales takes a significant chunk of that dark blue section of that graph. RWE is a worldwide business, and we have opportunities and projects all over the world. But we do want to make sure that Wales sees its fair share and a big share of that growth. So how will we do that? Well, we at RWE, as I say, are a project developer, we're an engineering company. We've built a lot of offshore wind farms now around the world. And we've taken a view that we're at this stage agnostic about the technology that will be successful in the longer term for floating offshore wind. And that comes from our experience in fixed offshore wind, where we saw foundation types and actually all the technology develop quite quickly from an early stage where innovation was really fast, and then became, as we saw technologies mature, really established certain particular technologies as being the real leaders. And the driver for that change was really cost. And we understand, having worked in offshore wind for many years, that what will drive innovation is the cheapest technology and the technology that delivers the best LCOEs. So we see potential for different technologies at this stage to come forward, but then mature and work through to what might be the most efficient and best technologies. And they may not be always applicable to each area of the world. There may be technologies that are more applicable to certain parts of the world more than others. So at this stage, we're looking at different solutions. So the three that we have invested in ourselves are up on the slide. They're different types of technology. So we have a barge, a device in the SciTech system, which we expect to go into to test at a scale, 2 megawatt scale next year. We have the American University of Maine project, Aquaventus, which is effectively a concrete-based semi-submersible, which is again moving to. It's been at a 1/8 scale. It's now going up to a larger scale. With 2023 as the expected date for a really significant demonstrator there. And we have the Tetrad Spa project, which is going into to demonstration this year. And that's a tubular steel design, so a sort of take on the Spa technology that's been sort of seen, I think, in the High Wind project, but a different model with this keel, which is submersed beneath the ocean. And to give you a flavour for that, here's a recent picture of that being assembled in Norway. And I think what this shows, and hopefully gives a bit of a flavour for, is that what we're looking for are designs that can be deployed around the world in different port locations, with this, dare I say, Meccano effect being quite an important way to be able to make sure that we can deliver big parts of the device and put it together in different places, so that we try and avoid this scenario where we have big yards in certain spots that can deliver big foundations, but they're only able to do so in certain parts of the world, and you can't deploy that technology then in very different parts. So you end up towing devices around the world and installing them having been fabricated elsewhere. So this technology is one example. It's not necessarily going to be applicable everywhere, where you can bring the steel to one place and then assemble it and then deploy it. You still need a lot of space, you still need certain equipment and plant, but it's potentially a good solution, which is applicable in broader parts of the world where perhaps the port facilities aren't going to be able to support enormous structures being built. This is steel, and of course, steel production is something that in South Wales we're very proud of as well. So, the question and the opportunity to bring together steel fabrication, port infrastructure, and then project development is a really exciting one, and one that we look forward to exploring as our projects progress in Wales. But equally, we have concrete solutions. As I said, the Aquaventus is a concrete-based solution, and the question of how and where that kind of stuff comes together is going to be really interesting to see as we move forward. So getting to the specifics of what we're doing in Wales at the moment, as I say, we have a fondness for Wales across Wales, but North Wales is where we've done most of our offshore development so far, and for that reason and for other reasons too, we are looking at a site off the Anglesey coast at the moment, which we call Draigmore. And you can see from the slide, we have some really interesting strategic developments going on. Awlermore, which is a fixed wind site, which is an extension of Gwyntermore, on the other side of the Irish Sea, Dublin Array. And what we're hoping is that if we can secure a lease, which is not confirmed yet by the Crown Estate, in this area, we will be able to potentially leverage some of the skills and supply chain work that we've done already in North Wales to be able to deliver this project. And clearly, with other projects going forward at the same time, things like procurement of turbines and other things may be able to be aligned in a way that makes this worth, really work for us. As you can see, there's very deep water off the west coast of Anglesey, and we know that there are some really, some really exciting opportunities in that space. So we're looking at developing a project there, and we're waiting for the Crown Estate to decide, how whether we can go ahead with that in the near, well, hopefully next couple of months. Important to mention, I know for marine developers on the call, there's a real opportunity here with other projects going forward to potentially look at how we optimize grid infrastructure, and we're looking at that very actively as well, and hoping that we can bring together different elements, so offshore floating wind, marine, tidal, potentially hydrogen, and I know there's a lot of work going on Anglesey to support that as well. So that's the kind of picture for us in the short term. That's the project that we'd like to take forward in the short term. Longer term, I think we've heard a lot about this at this conference, and RWE certainly shares the view that the Celtic Sea is a very exciting opportunity for floating offshore wind, and we really hope that we can see the sort of development that has been suggested. And for RWE with Pembroke Power Station, we see an exciting opportunity to bring together floating wind, potentially hydrogen development, carbon capture. There's a real whole range of net zero technologies that we RWE think we can bring together in Pembrokeshire in the 2030s, and that's the kind of timescale that we think this is really going to take off. So we look forward to that opportunity and to being a really strong part of that team. So thank you very much, Diolch, and I'll hand back to Kerry.
Thanks very much, Alex. That's great to hear quite so much, and I'm impressed with the amount of investment already in offshore wind projects from RWE in Wales. I hadn't realised that it was quite as significant as it was. So finally, before we get on to the question and answers, I'd like to hand over to Steve Jeremy now, who is representing WaveHub and the Pembrokeshire demonstration zone.
Hi, Kerry, thank you for that. I won't have the same Welsh antecedents as Alex, unfortunately. Although I can say that I was educated in Bangor, where I got my maths and oceanography degree, and I was once the captain of HMS Cardiff. So I've got strong links to Cardiff as well. What I want to talk to you about today is a couple of things. I want to talk a little bit about floating offshore wind, the wave and tidal opportunity as seen from your Celtic cousins down in Cornwall. And I want to focus then a little bit on Pembrokeshire demonstration zone, or focus more on Pembrokeshire demonstration zone. My background is offshore almost all my life. First career in the Navy when I was a diver, sea command person, and had the unhappy thing of being what's known as a Whitehall warrior, working up in the MOD, so I know Whitehall very well. But then much more fun has been the more recent last decade or so in offshore renewables. I worked for a company called Mojo Maritime, working down, we were on wave and tidal and offshore wind specialist. Then James Fisher Group, same. And last but not least, I was taken on as the chair and now chief exec at WaveHub, where we're pushing forward floating offshore wind in Cornwall. When we come to where we are generally, we've been working very hard down here in the southwest. I remember, I think it was about a year ago that we had a Marine Energy Wales type conference where we presented what we thought was a fascinating floating offshore, and that went really well. I think it was important in the way that it exposed the speed with which floating offshore wind was going to entities such as the Welsh Government, for example, many of whom were aware of what was happening in wave and tidal, but weren't quite clear at that stage with floating. We've been working very hard to actually achieve success in the contracts for difference treatment of floating and wave and tidal. And as far as I can see, that's gone well. So we don't know what CFD allocation round 4 will look like, but the strong sense is that we'll have our own pot, which will mean that we're no longer trying to fight against the big beast that's conventional offshore wind. I think the second part of creating the market, which is so important, is the pipeline. And that starts really here down at WaveHub. If we're successful, at the moment I'm trying to sell the site to an offshore project or technology developer. And if we're successful with that sale, it will be before Easter. And if so, then we'll be looking to build out between 30 and 40 megawatts down here. and target that for AR4, it would be the first floating offshore wind project in the Celtic Sea. We've heard subsequently from Erebus, which is a terrific story. We know the Simply Blue team really well. Sam Roche-Perks has been a great fan of Cornwall down here. So actually, with the more we can do to help people such as Blue Gen and the Simply Blue team, the better. There's Pembrokeshire Demonstration Zone, which I'll come on to in a second. But what I wanted to do was just jump a little bit further ahead of Pembrokeshire Demonstration Zone and talk about the larger targets.
Steve, sorry to interrupt you. When you're looking down, we're losing a little bit of your speech.
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
No worries.
Looking at the larger targets, I think is the 1 gigawatt. I personally don't think that's enough. And I don't think it's enough because when you actually take out the existing pipeline, then essentially it leaves you 1 300 megawatt project in the Celtic Sea and one up in Scotland. So that doesn't make sense to me. It seems to me that we need more for floating offshore wind, and we need to go more quickly if that's possible. So coming now to Pembrokeshire Demonstration Zone, the history is long and how shall I say, contorted would probably be a good idea. We started on this in 2017 and won the contract here in Cornwall to develop that zone, and we still have yet to sign the final bit of the contract, but I'm hoping to sign it next month. So if that's the case, that's the funding comes jointly from Swansea Bay City Deal and WEFO, and it's the Swansea Bay City Deal project finance that we're hoping to sign off next week. The project, as originally scoped, was for 180 megawatts of floating offshore wind and wave demonstration, and there were open questions about how we might split that. What's become clear, though, is that with the delay in starting, we're running up against a barrier on ERDF funding. So because of the delay, and we're 3 years late in starting, it'll be difficult to do what we originally want to do. So about 6 months ago, we started to think again about the project. And we've taken it from a project which is solely focused on demonstration of floating offshore wind and or wave, to also introducing the idea of what we're calling now, and I think the industry is also calling an offshore multi-purpose integrator. Think of it as a super hub, but the hub that might, for example, be able to plug in up to 1 gigawatts worth of capacity from different projects. It could be from Pembrokeshire Demonstration Zone projects or other projects offshore. And in our minds here is solving the problem of what we know in the Navy as, or we call in the Navy as a snake's wedding of cables that come ashore on the North Sea. And rather than that, to have what I would call one large big offshore cable coming ashore and taking lots of projects power ashore. We think there's something in that. I think we're not the only ones. Ofgem, I think, have been thinking about it. I know for certain in my conversations with the Crown and State that they're supportive of the idea as well. And if we're successful in getting this part of the project going, then I think it could possibly lead to the first multi-purpose integrator, offshore multi-purpose integrator, possibly in the UK. Would be terrific if so. But anyway, hopefully we'll start work on that shortly. Again, it all depends on us signing the Swansea Bay City Deal, but again, fingers crossed we should do that, and then we'll be joining our Celtic Sea partners in Pembroke Dock Marine to go. We're really champing at the bit to do that. Let me conclude, Kerry. I think it's fair to say that when we started down this road 2.5 years ago, we were excited. I was once sat with my Mojo colleagues in about 2016. And I said, when the big oil and gas companies in, we'll be off to the races. And they're coming in. We know Total are in. I think some of you will no doubt see that Shell have bought into Ireland. Be interesting to see what that looks like. Again, that's with Mike's team up in Simply Blue. I think that's fantastic news. And that when they do come in, they come with big balance sheets and big pockets, and allows us to actually cross some of these difficult technology gaps. For us, we're pursuing down here, and as we sell the project here, we're refocusing on really putting all our weight into developing the Celtic Sea. For us, that's got 3 bits of it. Firstly, is trying to get offshore and get ahead in the planning process, so that we can accelerate the planning process and see if we can reduce the time to burn of an offshore wind project from 8 years down to something like 4. We want to see if we can help develop the supply chain, and we think the Celtic Sea supply chain is a supply chain that needs to be across the Celtic Sea. There's not one single region we think which can deliver, because there's so much potential. And last but not least, integrating the different parts of the support elements, research and development, skills, business support and investment, and making sure those are integrated in a way which really supports the industry. We have a target, according to the offshore wind sector deal, of UK content at 60%. And exports multiplying up by 5. I'm no doubt that if we can position this region in the way that we've described and the way you've heard some of the previous commentators talk about, that we will absolutely be able to hit that. I'm absolutely certain of it. It will require us to do things differently, but we've got the right attitude, and we've also got this wonderful thing, which is a clean sheet of paper. So with that clean sheet of paper, I just say that this is such an exciting time in the industry, and I'm really pleased to be working with the Welsh and hopefully soon the Irish on this opportunity.
Great, thank you very much, Steve. It's encouraging to hear, and I think particularly from my point of view, having worked in the southwest of England for a number of years and worked with Wave Hub and others, so it's great to see things continuing to develop down there. There's a few questions in the chat that I'm just going to pull out, but just before that, I just wanted to ask myself. So you've all mentioned supply chain and you've all mentioned port infrastructure, and I'm interested to understand both from the southwest and the sort of broader Celtic Sea point of view, and also those projects in Wales. Where do you think the weaknesses are, and have we, what work do we need to do to get these ports and that supply chain infrastructure in place in order to realise some of these projects that are perhaps a little bit further down the line? So I guess I'm directing that perhaps to Mike and Alex, probably in the first instance with the scale of your projects, and then to Graham and Sam after.
Kerry, a good question actually, and you've got to be pretty open and honest about your capabilities before you can actually grow into something that comes in. That's true in business and in life. Certainly there isn't the capability in the port infrastructure at the moment to handle floating offshore wind, which is our interest, in one single port. And maybe that is an aspiration for the future as we get to the larger scale deployment in the 2030s. But at the moment, it's going to be some kind of collaboration and cooperation, collective will to learn and develop their infrastructure and to see what the opportunities are with that from the projects that are coming through. Sessions like this are great to declare sort of people's aspirations, and hopefully the market will join with us in discussions to see what we can develop.
Yeah, brilliant.
Just to follow, I think that's right. I think there's a challenge. The question really for government is going to be: do they want to strategically choose a port or an area to develop? That's from a developer's perspective a really good idea. If we can work together and sort of choose those, in a way which is strategically helpful for development. I think we can see the Celtic Sea, the opportunity. No one's denying it. And I think it's really clear to government that that's where the offshore wind is moving. So choosing or trying to select one or two locations around the Celtic Sea that can develop and invest heavily to get the infrastructure in place to support that industry as it grows is really useful. But government has limitations around how much it can do as well, and the time frame it works within. So that we understand that is a challenge. Yeah.
And did Sam or Graham want to come in at all there from your point of view?
We're based here in Pembroke Dock, and with the Milford Haven redevelopment project going on, I guess there's very big opportunities there for the harbour to be improved and the facilities to be improved. I guess, and introducing maximum flexibility into that facility they're redeveloping is, I guess, a really important thing for us. Is it going to be module exports? Is it going to be these big, huge platforms floating in and out? I guess we want maximum flexibility so we can really address a range of opportunities, including O&M and all those sorts of things. So yeah, it's good to see that the Pembroke Dock area very active in terms of trying to meet the needs of the industry. So now's a good time to be telling them what we want, because they're in the midst of that project.
Yeah.
From our point of view, we're both a customer and a supplier. Thinking about ourselves as a supplier to the likes of Alex and Mike, our technology is built in a modular way. So Alex made a good point about this in his presentation. Obviously, in the context of another device, but we've worked hard with our machine to make sure that we can look at, you know, really quite a wide supply chain that can then supply pre-assembled modules together. And then we'd be looking at maybe thinking of Milford Haven as an assembly area rather than having to manufacture every single piece of steelwork in the machine. But obviously there is some good local suppliers who can do some of that in the Milford Haven area. So we also work with the port to look at ways of getting equipment into the water in a cost-effective way, and how we can make the layup space more efficient. So that's what we're doing from it as a supplier to these big projects. And then as a customer, then we are looking at who can supply us, because a lot of goes into our technology, and we think that's going to be a global supply chain. But right now we think the lion's share will be within Wales, and then it's just going to be a few specialist bits that we can import relatively easily. So that's where we're coming from. We think there's a huge amount that can be done locally. We don't necessarily need to think too further afield at the moment before we actually get our heads together and figure out what can be done locally.
Yeah, I guess it's been touched on by a few people and Steve there, but there's the opportunity for collaboration and different ports to have different roles in this. So perhaps some of the, you don't need all of the ports to become sort of super hubs like the one over on the East Coast, but there's roles for everybody in this. Sam, we've got quite a few technical questions for you here, so I hope you're prepared for these ones. So I've got a question here about the bottom deployment versus your floating wind platform deployment. And have you experienced, or do you expect to experience rather, a big difference in energy yields or your generation profile? And then the second question, which is linked, is around how you're going to manage the energy flows and the management and potential storage of energy generated through your integrated system. That's quite a lot.
Okay, some of them sound a bit too technical for me, but in terms of energy generation, I guess this is a multi-dimensional answer you've got to give. So the deployment depth for us is important. The depth beneath the waves affects our ability to extract energy. And then there's that issue. There's the directionality of the waves, which affect our power generation. And then there's the wave climate itself. When you come closer to shore, the wave climate tends to be diminished a little bit. So by going offshore floating, we're accessing larger wave climates, but they have more directionality. So there is this trade-off. But we've been analysing near shore, we've been analysing offshore, and we get very good results from both. But there is this trade-off between directionality and the wave climate itself. So that, I guess, as I said, it's multidimensional. There's no exact answer to this because it depends on the wave climate, largely depends on the wave climate. In terms of the integration of the electrical systems between the power generation system of what we're doing, what the wind turbine is doing, I guess the reality is that the wind turbine output is electrical and they have their own generator. We have the same. So we use our M-Wave modules to spin a turbine, which generates power. So it's really then down to integrating those two outputs into a single output, into a single export cable. So, and this is really beyond me. I'm happy to talk about the M-Wave generation, but we do have experts who can talk about how you integrate those electrical systems to get the best output, make the best use of the infrastructure. And the reality is we tend to contract this out to experts as well.
That sounds good. Okay. I've got a question I want to ask, and perhaps a challenging one, but we're sat here in 2021, we've got COP26 coming up towards the end of the year. There's no doubt now, there's no dispute about climate change and the need to act quickly and to think long term to develop these projects to get to that net zero target. And so I'd like to ask each of you in turn, if you've got 1 minute or a couple of minutes to sit down with the Secretary of State from BEIS or Boris Johnson, whichever one you fancy having a conversation with, that is, what would be your one piece of policy or one request you'd like to communicate to try and unlock some of the barriers and challenges that you've communicated, but in order to realise the masses of opportunity that you've all outlined? So I'm going to start with Steve on this one. So what would be your one ask of central government?
It's a pity because I'd like to do two.
I thought you would, but you can have two very quick ones.
I think I'll answer the question as if I were a technology developer as opposed to a project developer. And having worked with so many technology developers, it would find a mechanism probably other than the contracts for difference approach that helps exciting technologies get over the valley of death between early stage demonstrations through to the commercial stage. And again, I've watched and worked with wave, tidal and floating offshore wind developers who are in that position. Whether it's an innovation PPA, I don't know, but something which is really supportive and doesn't expect companies to get their equity up and then sort of destroyed by larger companies, but really gives them a chance to get across the road.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go to Mike next, and you are allowed to say the same things as each other if that suits. So.
Did you know I was going to say the same thing, Kerry? Yeah, I mean that is actually one of the asks. We've got the stepping stone approach, test and demonstrator project coming up relatively soon, pre-commercial after that, because we think the mechanisms and the port infrastructure, the supply chain, all needs to be rehearsed to actually see the large scale deployment, real commercial deployment in the 2030s. And everybody's agreeing with that. So the mechanism doesn't quite work to encourage that at the moment, especially when we're talking about levelising the economy across the UK, supporting development within Wales. There's got to be another mechanism to do that. So I'd support Steve and repeat what he said.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Alex, have you got anything to either echo or add?
Well, something a little bit more prosaic, I'm afraid, but it's grid infrastructure where we see the main constraints and challenges to development in the UK and in Wales specifically. No one thinks it's sexy or cool or exciting. Unfortunately, it's not spinny turbines in the sea and pictures of waves and all this stuff, but it is the actual means by which we deliver this power that we're creating offshore. And there isn't enough connections. They're too slow. The process by which they're managed is appallingly archaic. And the cost of transmitting is very expensive, and all those things can be addressed with a really painful process of reform. And that reform, I think, is going to take a number of years. It's starting, and we're very excited to be part of that. And we wish it well and we support it, but that should be the focus now. I think all the developers who are in the space in the UK know where the projects can be built. We just don't know how to connect them.
It's certainly a challenge. I'm at the moment working with Devon County Council on developing the Devon Net Zero Action Plan, and it's a key blocker for all energy technologies that's coming up, all low carbon energy technologies. It's a key one that we need to address. Sam, have you got anything to bring in there?
Sorry, is that me?
Yes, sorry, what's your
obviously, I think waves are very sexy as well. So I agree with Alex fully on that one. But I guess the reality is we've had fantastic support from the Welsh Government to get to where we've got to. The reality is we must now look at the next projects and getting them financed. We need to be able to achieve financial close on those projects. And as Steve said, and Mike reiterated, we need a mechanism whereby we can get these projects past financial close. Of course, you need port infrastructure and you need all this other stuff around it and grid connections, but the harsh reality is the money has to make sense. And right now, we don't see a clear pathway for getting our projects financed here in the UK. That's the biggest, the valley of death, getting across the valley of death. The sun is right over there. We just need to get across the other side. So mechanisms that allow us to get there, that's what we need.
Long-term, flexible, sort of fit-for-purpose mechanisms would make.
Well, I want something nice and short-term. Really, that's the issue.
Yes,
I mean, how do we go from? We've got a nice project, great team. It's the next project and having that funded. We're all the developers are pre-revenue, and so it's very important. So this is the harsh reality.
Yeah, and Graham.
Yeah, I would. Whatever the support mechanism is, whether it's CFDs or IPPAs, I would link the support to the percentage of local content that's being supplied by the project. For example, I would say you can have £1 per megawatt hour per percent of local content. And I think you'd see pretty quickly the amount of local content would suddenly dramatically increase in the UK supply chain for every renewable project. And maybe that's something that post-Brexit might actually be in some way achievable.
Yeah, and that's an interesting idea. No, they're really, really great thoughts there from everybody. I'm not surprised by any of those responses, but I hope that wasn't too negative, by the way. I realise I've made you all focus on all the things that you'd like to be better, but I think it's just because it's such an exciting opportunity. It'll be, as you've all outlined. There are a few other questions just popping through then in the chat. Steve, I've got one for you here. It says, so does Wave Hub have an idea of where the cable would come ashore? So presumably, obviously, for the Pembrokeshire site. And then it says the area around Freshwater West is already becoming congested. So have you been considering these points at the moment?
No, we've looked at them in principle, but until we've got resources, we can't look at them in practice, I'm afraid.
The high level for now.
I think the question itself re-emphasises the importance of what we're doing. If we've already got cables, then we'd much rather, it makes much more sense for us to actually bring big cables ashore. And I'm certain that that's exactly why they've been looking at it in the North Sea. The great advantage we've got, of course, is we do have a blank sheet of paper, and we could do this very differently. In our mind, we have a small number of cables with offshore integrations made available to project developers. That just makes much more sense. So that's why we're really keen to keep this off.
Great. And there's a question here around the challenges with co-location and presumably also with sort of a fully integrated solution. What are the challenges there regarding sort of liabilities? So how would you be, and insurance, so how would you be looking to overcome those challenges? So does anybody want to volunteer themselves for that one?
So we're in the midst of planning projects with this very issue to be dealt with. So as mentioned, for our projects with Technique, we need wind turbines. And so we've had to face this. We've gone out to the market to see what we could get. And the reality is they're all very busy. They're busy doing what they'd like to do, which is supply lots of wind turbines. And the engineering effort that goes into doing a one-off prototype for us is the same as goes into a very large project. So that's one of the realities we face. And they have certain warranty issues they need to deal with. So we've overcome that problem. I guess it'll become clear as we start talking more about the project going forward. But it certainly is an issue to make sure that we respect the wind turbine manufacturers' specifications and warranty requirements, and we meet the wave energy system design requirements. And so that's certainly an important part of our project, and making sure that we, have the right agreements in place that allow everyone to be protected, to make sure the warranties and those sorts of things all work out.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Graham, did you have anything to add from your point of view?
No, I don't think so. I think Sam summed it up. There's for us, we'll be the supplier of a platform and a wave energy system. There'll be warranties involved with those, obviously, and as Sam says, it's we're quite sure that our platform will be among the lowest in terms of nacelle accelerations and motions, and that if a turbine's working on other platforms, we won't be adding any extra risk. Quite the opposite, we'll be removing a bit of risk from that side of things. But yeah, the warranties of the platform itself and the wave energy device are an issue for small companies, and generally some form of collaboration or partnership will probably be the best way through that.
Did either Mike or Alex have anything to add sort of from the wind side?
Yeah, I'd just say, Kerry, that when people ask me about co-locations of the different technologies, I always say don't mix tidal stream with anything. It's a nightmare. But actually the advantage of wearing, and I'm cautious, I must say, about the integration. I think it needs to be tested. But if you can get it right, what you do get is smoothing, because of course the two power elements are out of train or out of sync, so you can actually get an improvement to the grid. So I just see wave energy as delayed wind energy, really, that's coming 12 hours behind. Yeah. So I think if it's made to work, it's a really good thing, and of course it allows wave energy to use the infrastructure that would already have been offshore for wind energy. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd support what's been said in that this is a market where innovation is really blossoming, and we at the moment, we're looking at different designs, we're looking at different ideas. We don't understand and know marine and tidal as well as the companies that are involved here. We know wind well, so the journey we've got to go on is to understand, is there an opportunity there that we can be part of? And at the moment, we're not there yet in terms of the integrated solutions. But as I say, the industry is at a stage, and things can change quickly. So let's see. Sam's point about procurement, though, is important, and that that's something that we're very focused on, because we know for sure you can't buy turbines down the local market. This is a very difficult process to solve. So for any kind of scale project that's below a gigawatt, these days is a challenge. So we hope we can help in that sense, because we obviously have a number of projects going on around the world, and we want to use that sort of market share appropriately to help innovation.
Yeah, great. And Mike, just finish up with you.
Well, we're not a dual technology solution. We're concentrating on floating offshore wind to show and demonstrate the capabilities of that technology at a scale and a stepping stone scale to help sort of identify commercialization later on. So it's easy for us. We've simplified that solution, I guess. Take away the problem.
Yeah. Okay, we've just got a couple of minutes left. Somebody's asked if the panel had a magic wand, what would be their one wish? But presumably would be similar to your requests from government. But does anybody have anything additional to steal the show with?
I think if you'd asked me the question 2 years ago, I'd say to be where we are now. We've arrived in a place where actually, with the big international oil companies in, so it's ours to lose now. So again, if I'd been asked that question, that's what I would have said. But really, the opportunity is fantastic, and if we lose it, then we've only ourselves to.
And I think just to add one thing, Kerry, we haven't mentioned our feathered friends in this session yet, and I think it's important, and I think there's some development going on which requires, from a wind developer's perspective, birds ornithology is a really important part of our world, and we are really open and are seeing, I think, increasingly collaboration now with conservation groups and solutions being discussed which can help facilitate faster development, which is within the kind of boundaries of habitat preservation that we need to stay within. So we think that kind of those solution focused dialogue is what we need in the industry with all of the different habitats issues that we're going to face, particularly now the Celtic Sea. It's a new environment really for development, but there will be habitats constraints that we need to consider. So let's get together with those conservation groups and start discussing those issues now and find solutions that work for everyone.
Yeah, that's a really good point to finish on there. I see that Manon has appeared, which I think means we are time up. So I will just thank all of the speakers for today, and that's a really interesting discussion, and all of your presentations were really informative and useful. So thank you very much for taking the time today to speak. Thank you very much, everyone.
Great, thanks, Ken. Just would like, on behalf of the Marine Energy Wales team, just to thank all of our speakers on the really interesting presentations, and to Kerry as well for chairing seamlessly. It's just really incredibly exciting to see all the recent progress that's been made in Wales, and as MEW, we're really proud to support our wave on floating offshore wind members to develop the sector further.